screen starts glowing and the film starts rolling. You wanna be knowing what you might be in for. So give the show a listen and find out what you're missing. Put yourself in position for the is a good score.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the 218th episode of The Goods, a film podcast. It is not just the 218th episode, but the second week of Brian's 2025 theme month. Is there an official title for the theme month, Brian?
Well, I reckon this is Maximonth,
okay,
Dan.
Yeah. Minimonth or Maximonth, depending on the selection of the week. So we're going with Maximonth today, because the film that I have selected is the 1954 atomic monster thriller B-picture entitled Them! You gotta have the exclamation mark at the end. Them!
Right. Them with an exclamation point joins other movies that we've talked about, like The Stuff and the Substance, where they're being deliberately vague.
What about the rare double exclamation mark? Everybody wants some! From our third episode. What I kept thinking of was, because its pronoun was her from Arrested Development. Them? Her? Even though that one's a question mark.
There was that movie, Her, with Joaquin Phoenix. I didn't like that movie.
I haven't seen it. I do like that director, though. It's Spike Jonze. I'd like to bring his Where the Wild Things Are, because I have complicated feelings about that one, to the pod at some point. So anyways, Maximonth, Minimonth, we got Them. I'm going to just say it like it's a word without an exclamation point going forward. And so I chose Them for a few reasons. So the first is that I don't like ants, Brian. I don't think most people like ants, but there are not too many things in this world that I have like a visceral aversion to. I don't know. I feel like I don't have too many phobias. We have discovered that I'm not wild about heights. I went up a lighthouse at the beach a couple years ago, and when I got to the top, I stepped out on the balcony. The balcony was like below waist height, and you're like 200 feet in the air. And I did like the dolly zoom where your whole perspective changes, you know, like
the Jimmy
exactly,
Stewart.
Yeah. But ants are one of the few. And I attribute this to a very specific incident in my life. There are not too many things, you know, people talk about being traumatized by something that happened to them as a kid and that like kind of haunts them for the rest of their life. I don't really have too many of those. Like no one movie scared me so much or one incident scared me so much that it like left that long of a thing that it still triggers a reaction in me. But this is probably the closest. It was when I was actually in high school. So normally you think about that, it's like something like that happens when you're 6 years old or something. But for me, this was high school. And I used to, and still do, eat bowls of cereal fairly frequently. And so the moment that traumatized me was I poured myself a bowl of cereal. I still remember it was Life cereal. Great cereal, by the way. I poured the milk, took a bite, looked down, and ants were floating in the milk. And I've never been more grossed out in my life. Like eating ants isn't really that bad, you know? Like people eat ants, you know, for nutrition. Isn't peanut butter ants or something like a cuisine you can order or something? I don't know.
I feel like you may be combining two food items. You know, they call ants on a log that snack where it's like raisins and peanut butter on a piece of celery. But I have seen chocolate-covered ants. I've never seen peanut butter-covered ants.
Do people eat ants? Yes, some humans consume ants in certain cultures around the world. This practice is known as entomophagy. How do you say that suffix? Like when you eat something? I don't know.
possibly entomophagy.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so according to Google AI Overview, yes, people do. So chocolate ants, is that what you were saying, Brian? Okay.
Right. That's what I've heard of. But also, like, if you go to kindergarten snack time, you could have ants on a log, which does not actually contain ants.
That's just celery.
It does contain peanut butter.
Celery, peanut butter, and raisins. What?
I have an eating ant story. So one time at marching band camp, I set my bass clarinet down on the ground, and I must have put it on an anthill because I was playing it, and I felt things crawling in my mouth. And then I pulled it out, and oh yeah, they were swarming all over the mouthpiece.
Yeah, that would have freaked me out.
But I will say, I really don't like spiders, really don't like bees and wasps. Ants have never really bothered me. Of course, there's all different kinds of ants. There's different sizes and temperament. But I don't like to have them in the house. It's, a sign of uncleanliness if you got ants in your house. Not as bad as roaches or something, but yeah, it's a bad sign if you get ants.
Ants are fairly normal. I don't know. I had ants in my house growing up, even when we were taking care of the house pretty well, and I still see them every now and then. I just feel like in certain climates, ants just expand everywhere, and we're in one of those climates. But you're definitely right that it gets worse if you leave food and crumbs out and you don't do a good job taking care of your space. But yes, speaking of ants, that happened. The story I told, the image of just an ant floating, it's worse than an ant walking because all their limbs spread out, so you get a full vision of their body shape with all their little buggy, with the thorax and the antennae and all that. Yeah. But anyways, that was right around the time that the fourth Indiana Jones movie came out. I guess, yeah, it probably would have been a couple years before Indiana Jones came out. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which I tilt slightly positive on overall. It's not as good as the first three, but it's kind of weird and it's got charm, particularly in its first half. But one scene that always stuck with me was the giant ant scene in that. Particularly, there's a moment that just, again, it kind of stuck with me and scared me. I was 19 when this movie came out, but it was a guy gets an ant on him, just one. He barely touches one, but that's enough for him to get sucked into the ant. It's like a river flow almost. And they crawl in and around him and stuff, and it's really gross.
Yeah, they all go in his mouth.
Yeah, it's bad. Anyways, Them is a giant ant movie. Before we dive into it, though, we like to have a discussion during these theme months that is maybe related or maybe not related to the specific movie at hand, but is related to the overall theme of the month. And in this case, max a month, min a month, big things that are bigger or smaller than they normally are in real life is the theme here, I guess. So we have two smallish topics here, Brian. So the first is, you suggested this one. You didn't give me further explanation. You said, let's talk about the square cube law, which I am well familiar with, but so why did you suggest this as a discussion topic for Big Small Month, Brian?
So this is key in Big Small Month. We watch a movie that has big animals in it. I'm glad that we got a big animal movie. And we wonder, what if? What if we had an ant that was, what do they say? The smaller ones are 9 feet long. And it's why couldn't we have that? Well, the reason we couldn't have that is the square cubed law, which I think I learned about for the first time on Bill Nye the Science Guy. And I guess it's kind of self-evident if you just take a step back. So if you double the length and the width of something, you make it twice as big, you think, oh, well, is it going to weigh twice as much? No, because you double the dimensions and you end up cubing, right? You cube the volume, which means you cube the weight. So you double the length, you double the width, you have actually octupled the volume and the weight. And so as you're scaling up, it's I don't know if it's exponential, but it's bigger than linear, faster than linear, that you're increasing the weight and the volume. Meaning that just a big heavy thing, a giant animal, the biological systems can't support that. And like this even happens, I think we've talked about things like Marfan syndrome and just various medical conditions that cause human bodies to grow large. They run into problems past a certain point. It's like you just, your systems wear out faster.
Yeah, so a couple things on this. So first, the reason it's the cube square law is because there's a certain unintuitive nature to this that particularly comes out when you're looking at objects in 3D. So like the classic example is, all right, if you have let's say a box, okay? So if you have a box and you doubled it on each dimension, you would need, okay, so now you're right. It's 2 times as tall, 2 times as wide, and 2 times as deep. And you need 4 times as much material to make the box, but you make 8 times as much storage capacity. So the thing that's unintuitive about this is that the surface area of something doesn't grow at the same rate as the volume of it. And this has a lot of implications in pretty much every single scientific and engineering field. So if you get a lot fatter, you get more body mass, but you don't get an equivalent amount of surface area because your mass is growing cubic proportionally and your surface area is growing quadratically. And what this means is that this is why, like, when it gets really hot, people who are overweight in particular are like really, really impacted by the increasing heat. It's because their body has twice as much body mass, like producing heat, but only a disproportionately less amount of skin to let out that heat from inside the body. So that's like just one example of where it impacts people. Their muscles and their organs and their hearts are just as strong as mine, but like when you have body mass in that proportion, it impacts you that way. And that's what we call an allometric symptom of a species growing. And so that's kind of what you're talking about with like the ants thing. So we see little ants and they can carry things that are like much bigger than them, heavier than them. And so, yes, naturally we think, well, if an ant that size could carry like, I don't know, crumbs from a bread that weigh 3 times as much as it, you know, like a little piece of food or something, the scrap of something that weighs X times its mass. The thought of a giant ant that could do that is extra terrifying because imagine how much stronger it would be if that scaled up in the same way. But it just doesn't, because all of the support that an ant body would need, like all of the ways that biological creatures exist, it doesn't happen that way. And a lot of it, yeah, you said Marfan syndrome. So like people who are really, really tall disproportionately need like leg braces and leg surgeries and stuff because the human body, the way, the shape that we're designed isn't designed to have those proportions. Like it doesn't just scale up in the way that you think intuitively that it should, you know? And that's why like we can't really make skyscrapers taller than we already have because the mass of the stuff inside the building would just be not possible.
Yeah, it's like the ground needs to be able to hold it up, and the really big ones, they taper. You know, they get narrow at the top because it's like each story that you add on, all the stories beneath have to hold up themselves plus the new stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
Shout out to Arthroplura, the 7-foot-long millipede that existed way back in the day. You know, there was an era in the fossil record where there was more oxygen in the atmosphere, which also plays into how arthropod bodies can work, because they breathe different than we do. But, like, there was a time in the jungly prehistoric past that there were big dragonflies and shit. Stuff that's cool to see models of at museums, but would be probably a problem to run into.
Yeah.
I don't want to be meeting no 7-foot-long millipedes.
One interesting thing is if you go to the Wikipedia page for the square cube law, it actually shouts out the film that we're going to discuss today, Them, because of how unrealistic it is that ants that were this size would behave in this way and would be as strong as they're shown as being. That's a problem like with all kaiju movies. So like King Kong, you know, there couldn't be an ape that big. There's just no way an ape could be that size. And this also has really big implications on like testing of medicines on animals. So it's like really complicated. Even if like a organism has pretty much exactly the same makeup that we do as humans, it's really complicated to understand the way that all of those things interplay with each other to try and figure out dosage and the way that organs interact with each other, because it's all based on like the proportionality of all these interacting systems. So yeah. And one last piece is one reason that you see so many undersea creatures that are very big compared to humans is because the buoyancy of being in water drastically reduces the pressure, the stress put on systems by gravity. So like you couldn't have like an elephant the size of a blue whale, because underwater it doesn't need to hold itself up. The buoyancy of water does that. Whereas obviously if you're on land, you need to hold yourself up and move yourself around. So yeah, I rambled longer than I planned to on all of that. Let's move to our second topic. If you had a gun or a magic wand, Brian, and you could shrink or grow something in your life, what is something that you would shrink or grow?
Well, as with many superpowers, I think there would be ways probably to abuse this, get into Ring of Gaiji's territory. But you said an elephant. I think an elephant, if you shrank that down to like the size of a dog, that would make a good pet.
Oh, that's a good answer. Like with the big ears and the trunk.
Yeah, I think it could be friendly and kind of smart and just not so destructive if it's smaller.
Okay. Would it still make its trumpeting noise, but it would be like a higher pitched trumpeting noise?
I would hope so. What about you? What are you using your Ant-Man gun on? Your Pym particles?
I thought a little bit about it. I think it depends a lot on like the rules of the shrinking. So I'm kind of assuming that as you grow something, the number of atoms grows in proportion. It's like that's the thing about growing or shrinking something. Like either you're giving it more atoms or increasing the space between those atoms. But like I think we kind of intuitively know what it means to make something bigger or smaller. So I'm just going to go with like intuitive rules that like essentially you're getting more atoms. I mean, the obvious thing is like get a diamond or gold and grow it and sell it, and then you could live off of that for the rest of your life. Like that would be life-changing. I also thought about, okay, let's be a little bit more altruistic. Like I'm not going to self-enrich. Is there like a food that you could grow and you could get it as big as like Times Square, you know, and then distribute that to the whole planet and then like drastically reduce world hunger? I didn't come up with a good answer. I liked the image of a really big bean, but I don't think that would be that wouldn't be the answer. I don't think. I don't know.
Yeah, you got to factor in spoilage. But what if you just shrink all the people and then they eat less?
Hey, that would be a good movie.
Well,
or it would be a mediocre movie.
It wasn't that good a movie. I think we're both talking about Downsizing, which I watched recently. I found the premise really intriguing, and then it only really deals with the intriguing part of the premise for like 20 minutes, and then it was just a very meandering movie, and it like kept changing what it was actually about.
And it's kind of like much more interested in being a parable about like climate change and scarcity of resources, and how do we view these things as humans, as a society. And less about, boy, what are all the weird things that would happen to you if you got really small, which is, I was hoping.
It is par for the course for Big Small Month, though. So if we want to talk downsizing, it could get its own episode.
That's on my long list. I don't think I'm going to pick it because I have just one more pick, but it would be interesting. I would like to talk about Alexander Payne at some point. I like him as a writer and director. All right, let's talk about Them, Brian. So Them is an atomic monster film, which was a wave of films mainly thought of as occurring in the 50s. As with all waves, you see tendrils of it kind of recurring throughout history. And it's kind of like in a Venn diagram with the kaiju genre of Godzilla. So we talked about Godzilla, the original Godzilla, pretty early in our run, because Brian got me this book that was really interesting, that talked a lot about the history of the kaiju film, when I knew pretty much nothing about it before Brian got me that book. But it has some overlap with the American Hollywood phenomenon that is the atomic monster film. And I think Them is kind of the quintessential atomic monster film for a number of reasons. It made the subgenre popular. It was kind of like the one that kicked off the boom, but it's also like the most pure example. Like, it's very specifically about monsters, and they're very specifically atomic related. So how many of these kinds of movies have you seen, Brian?
So I've seen a good number. This is actually pretty early. So I guess you've got The Day the Earth Stood Still is 1951, and that one doesn't have a giant monster, but is very much like a nuclear scare film sci-fi parable. But this was 1954, and it's, I think, still the one that people think of as like a giant animal sci-fi horror movie of this era. Like, it's carved out that role for itself, but it definitely had contemporaries, had potentially imitators. I know there was Tarantula. And I also think of, like, what Ed Wood was doing. But, like, Plan 9 from Outer Space was 1959, so already, like, 5 years after this. The very first kind of sci-fi B-movie I ever saw is called The Hideous Sun Demon. And it's basically a reverse werewolf movie where this dude can't go out in the sun because he'll turn into a lizard man. But it gets triggered by, like, a nuclear experiment. And another one is The Beast of Yucca Flats, which was my first Gauntlet episode, where it's Tor Johnson ends up in a nuclear blast, and then he turns into, like, an ogre. So it's not always like a giant, but always there's some nuclear blast that, like, mutates a guy, and then it unleashes bad forces. It's, you know, not enough that there's the threat of atomic warfare, but it may have unforeseen consequences. It could have tendrils.
Right. And I think a couple things there. So they tended to be what you would call B movies, kind of cheap genre movies, which meant that a lot of them were not very good. So you cited some that are kind of on the fringes of it, but are other, like, B sci-fi movies. In general, I think the B sci-fi movement from the 50s was kind of all related to the Sputnik and nuclear anxiety stuff that was going on in the Cold War, you know? It's like all of a sudden it seemed like the world was ruled by scientists in collusion with the government, and they were doing things beyond the pale of what humanity had been able to do in the past, and it had the potential to obliterate us.
Yeah, everything could be ended in a moment. Man's reach exceeds his grasp.
And those are certainly themes that you would see in, like, Godzilla, for example, but I think it's just crystal clear in Them.
Was the first Godzilla movie also 1954?
Yes, same year as this. I would imagine that they were made without knowing what the other was doing, but it is kind of interesting to see what they focused on. Like them is we'll see much more about bureaucratic response and containment. And Godzilla has a lot of that too, but it also has like kind of unmitigated catastrophe and apocalypse upon urban areas, which I think you can attribute to the fact that, you know, Japan actually experienced the explosions of the atomic bombs. But there definitely is shared DNA between the two films.
Right. What really struck me about them is it takes itself totally seriously, which is not the impression I get from a lot of these 50s campy monster movies.
Yeah, I think that's astute. This film is directed by this guy named Gordon Douglas, who I read a little bit about. He was kind of a do-it-all director who made a whole bunch of movies, but it seems like Them is probably his most famous film, but he was kind of known for like keeping his movies kind of tense and flowing and just kind of having good control of tone. And I think that in particular resonates in Them. It is, as you said, it never settles for camp or for silliness. It takes its scares pretty seriously, and like it works pretty hard to build suspense in like pretty much all facets of its craft. The editing, the sound. I really want to talk about the sound a little bit. And I just think in general, it's a pretty well-made film. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about it. We'll go through the plot here. It's not a super plot-heavy film. An interesting choice is that it's a very procedural film. Like there are characters, but in general, it's more about like the various institutions. What are they doing to resolve the problem, understand it, and resolve it step by step, you know?
Right. And for as well as we know this as the Giant Ant movie, it's mysterious I mean, you don't see an ant, I don't think, until like the 45-minute mark. It's intentionally mysterious about what is them.
Right.
What are they?
And yeah, the first time you see them is like I mean, I don't want to get too carried away, but like it made me think of the famous Jaws jump scare, because all of a sudden you see this giant ant rise up behind the guy. You've been hearing this kind of noise that's associated with it. And there's this moment when you first encounter the ants that like made my heart stop for a second. Some really good filmmaking in here, but yeah, we can kind of jump into it. I mean, just one last thought on the atomic monsters. I think another theme here, and then we definitely see this in Them. Like I said, I think Them just does a great job of outlining what the quote-unquote atomic monster subgenre of films was that, again, is connected to all the B-movie sci-fi stuff going on in the 50s. But part of it is not only were humans going further than they should, but it was a violation against nature. So like, this is nature fighting back, reclaiming itself, reclaiming the world from this atomic destruction and theory and unnatural exploration that humans were doing on the fabric of the universe, you know? And I think we'll see some of that here. So why don't we dive into it, Brian? Any other big month, small month thoughts before we talk about Them?
I'm just really glad that you picked this one. It was one that was on, I don't know if you'd call it my short list, but like, what are the most iconic big small movies? And Them is one of them. And I had never watched the whole thing. I'd not sat down and consumed it. So I'm glad that we got this chance.
Oh, I guess one last thing I'll say is I don't have too many stories of like, I turned on a movie and I watched some of it and I've never been able to find it since. But when I was in, I think, high school, I turned on a movie on the Sci-Fi Channel, and it was, I'm pretty sure, giant ants, and I'm pretty sure it was not Them. So like I was turned on Them saying, is this the one that I saw all those years ago? And I don't think it is. I think there was some other movie. The thing that I remember about it is I feel like it used a super zoom in on the ants themselves and then like compositing that with footage of the people. as opposed to this, which uses like animatronic-y effects for the ants. So my hunt for that other giant ant movie, I guess, will continue beyond today. All right, so Them opens with honestly a really creepy image. It's a pretty good setup to the film. So we see these two policemen scouring this desert, and we discover that they've kind of found this wandering girl. And little girls are creepy, Brian. A lot of movies through the years have leveraged the juxtaposition. That's a word that some discords I'm in like to make fun of as being overused. The contrast of the innocence and purity of a little girl with sinister overtones.
Well, as the father of 2 daughters, I guess you would know.
Can you think of any of the great little girls are creepy movies, Brian?
There's The Bad Seed. There's
The Shining.
Yep.
And then Orphan, I think. Isn't that the premise of Orphan?
Right. And arguably Exorcist. I mean, she's not that little, but...
Yeah.
Right. It's like monstrous forces in diminutive, vulnerable form.
M3 Megan has a little bit of that. Although it's also a robot there. And it dances like it's a TikTok video. So...
And I haven't seen either of those, but I heard the second one was less dedicated to being a horror movie, kind of like the sequel to Happy Death Day.
Yeah, or the comparison I saw was Terminator to Terminator 2. Although the first Megan is nowhere near as good as the first Terminator. I haven't seen Megan 2 yet, but I would see it because I gave Megan 1 a soft thumbs up. But anyways, yeah, so they find this girl wandering the desert, and she's like traumatized when they rescue her. She won't speak, and she's clearly seen something horrible. And they go and explore the site where they think this girl came from. I think it's a camper or like a trailer, and it's been destroyed, but they can't make sense of the way that it's been destroyed. It's like something burst out of it instead of breaking into it. And all of the valuables have been left intact, except the food, in particular, the sugar, has been stolen and kind of torn away from it. So like, what could this be? And they find a print that doesn't resemble any animal footprint that we know of in the ground. And they get like a plaster of it, and they bring it back to the base, and this gets escalated to the FBI.
And the lighting and the music and the sound effects of this search, this like first third of the film, is really menacing and evocative. And I was surprised just that it was earnest in a way I didn't expect.
Not just...
And like actually scary.
Yeah, not just earnest, but good. Like, I don't know, a lot of these 50s sci-fi movies, like I said, not known for being good, you kind of had to enjoy them in spite of the fact that they weren't suspenseful, they weren't well lit, they weren't well acted. The blocking of the direction was not very good. This, you don't have that problem. I was pretty impressed by the filmmaking overall in this. I completely agree with you. I think the opening third of this is the film's best stretch, like leading up to that first jump scare, because it just does such a good job of making you curious about when we're going to see the thing. Like, even if you know if it's the big ant movie, which I assume pretty much everybody who watches it nowadays, and probably even people who watched it back then, based on looking at the posters, knew what it was, but you don't know quite what it's going to look like. You don't know when it's going to happen, and you don't know exactly what the tenor of the danger is going to be. So it really builds that tension and that suspense. Part of the people that they bring in to help resolve this are these two scientists. So it's an old man and a beautiful young woman is the second scientist, who's the old scientist's daughter. And these are some of the protagonists, I would say. We get a little bit of like gee whiz, you're pretty, Mrs. from the FBI agents when she comes to town. And also like, oh, as a lady like you shouldn't be dealing with scary monster death stuff like this. It's not a major theme of it, but there's a little bit of like this kind of proto-feminism, like she can solve the problems just as well as the men around her, you know?
Right. They always refer to her as doctor. Everybody calls her doctor, especially the father.
Right. And the closest we have to a protagonist is this police officer. And it's played by an actor named James Whitmore, who I feel like I've definitely seen in stuff, but I was trying to place what it was. I didn't look him up. Brian, did you recognize him from anything?
I definitely recognized him because he has these big, bushy Muppet eyebrows. And I know him from an episode of The Twilight Zone, at least. And I'm sure I've seen him in other things, too. But he just has a distinctive face, and a lot of it is the eyebrows. He's got a big nose, too.
I'm going to look it up now. Oh, he's... No way. He's Brooks, the old guy from The Shawshank Redemption.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, and now that I'm saying that, I can see it exactly. He's got those distinctive eyebrows. That's great.
I also recognized the older scientist in the film, who I think his name is Dr. Medford, but the actor is Edmund Gwenn, and he played Santa in Miracle on 34th Street.
Oh, okay.
Like, the first time I heard him talking, it's like, wait a minute, I know that, like, nobody else has this voice. But he doesn't have a beard in the movie. He's clean shaven. So I didn't put it together for a few minutes, but I was listening to him talk. It's like, that's gotta be Santa.
Threw you off. Then you figured it out. So they begin this sort of investigation, and they kind of connect it to some of these other deaths and disappearances that have been going around. And they're kind of like formulating this theory for what it could be before we actually even see the ants. And they do this great job of, the scientists are like, well, we think we know what it is, but you're not going to believe it. So I'm not going to tell you yet. And conveniently now it's going to further build suspense for the audience too.
One of the pieces of evidence they collect is formic acid. It's left behind at the scene of the crime. Mm-hmm. So, okay, Formicidae makes formic acid. It comes from ants. We, outsider observers, may know that. Apparently it's got a smell. I want to know what formic acid smells like, because I definitely don't.
Interesting. Yeah, I was thinking about that. So different varieties of ants. There's some that have very distinctive smells when you squash them. And I kind of associate that with the ones that were near my house when I was growing up. But not all ants smell that way. So I don't know if that was what I was smelling when I would kill those ants, or if it was a different smell. And yeah, that ends up being an important component. They can identify the ants in part by smell. And the formic acid is what ends up waking up the little girl. And she starts screaming and she says, "Them!" which is the title, of course. So while they're kind of doing this investigation, there's also this bad weather. So it does a really interesting job depicting like it's a sandstorm or something like that. And that's when the first giant ant shows up. It's actually behind the young woman scientist who just kind of like creeps up from the sand dune. And like I said, I thought this was a very scary introduction to the ants because people don't see it right away. And then all of a sudden it's there. And so, Brian, can you describe what these ant creatures look like and how they were, to your eyes as a filmmaker, designed and made?
So they are pretty big. Yeah, they're cool. They're kind of hairy, and usually it's like the front half of them that we see. They got these big mandibles that can pinch, and like fluffy antennas that wave around. That's one of the things, is the scientist says, "Oh, they see with their antennas, so shoot the antennas." And you see they get shot and like get floppy. They go flaccid, and it's like, oh, look like that probably hurt the ant. But yeah, I mean, I was sold, and what really did it for me is that once they start combating the ants, they set them on fire, and it's real fire. And like, how many of these did they have to make to be able to do that? It's like, that's probably expensive and dangerous. Like, to have all the actors and everybody around all that fire.
I love these flamethrower scenes. They're so cool. Fire is cool, and like it does weird stuff with the lighting where it's got this satanic glow around these ants and they're like quivering in the flame. Great puppetry or however they're doing it.
The other thing is, once you do that, I mean, you can only do that once. Set fire to the thing that you made. It's like you gotta either have some backup ants or just know that you got the cameras where you want them.
You got one try to light it on fire. And so they do eventually place that it's giant ants. And I didn't quite follow all of the bit about how it's like, well, it was 9 years ago, or I think it said 9 years ago, that they did the atomic test. And so now is when they would be coming out, or something like that. Something about the time span, because it does raise the question, well, if it's caused by nuclear tests, then why are we only seeing it in 1954? And so they kind of address it, but I didn't really quite understand the explanation.
Right. Yeah, we're at Los Alamos, if we didn't say. That's where this is going down.
Yeah. And so, again, you go back to, like, Godzilla, which didn't explicitly say, hey, this was about the nuke. That's what Godzilla is. It's the nuke. And I think also Godzilla was not just that, but there was like a couple other incidents that kind of inspired the anxiety that was associated with Godzilla. But no, them just out and out says, this is because we nuked a place and that had a dangerous impact on nature because we humans don't know what we are doing when we make these weapons of mass destruction. But after they figure out that it's giant ants, you're like, okay, well, ants have a hive, so you just go kill the hive. And that's probably what I would have guessed the whole movie would be. But that only gets you to about the halfway point of the film because they find where the ant is. They defeat the ant the first time. You're like, okay, well, you defeated the anthill. So now what? Well, they kind of tie in this sort of flying saucer fear too, because it turns out that they have this whole explanation, and I enjoyed, this is not the kookiest, like, pseudo sci-fi, like, all of this science that they describe. I'm like, okay, that sounds like it could be right. I don't think it actually is 100% right, but the way that they're describing this ant behavior could be right. And it's something like, basically, when the queens make other queens in this, like, a specific kind of larva, that those queens can then go spread to other places and form hives there. And so now the question is, where have all these queen ants gone? And are there other places we need to go and smoke out the ants? Because it's just going to spread and spread and spread the way that real life ants do if we don't go and kill these giant ants while we still can.
Yeah. So they go down into the first anthill and they're smoking it out, burning it out, and they find these egg cases that have been burst. And they know that 2 queens have escaped and they can fly. So that's another challenge with the square cubed law, is not only do they have to be able to walk around, apparently these ones can fly. So I think that's stretching the limits of Bernoulli there. But yeah, then, okay, now they've got to be on the lookout for flying ants. And I was thinking about the challenges of that, you know, all the cubic feet of air that a flying thing could be in, and less monitoring than we have now. You know, no satellites yet. It's like, how would you find these things before more get made? I could see that would be difficult.
Right. And in particular, it means that they could not just go as far as an ant could walk, but they could traverse some amount of space across the country, as the case may be.
I also found it funny so the scientist is insisting, well, we can't tell the public that these ants are ants. Like, we can't tell them that that's what's going on because there would be a panic. But we also need to crowdsource for information. We need eyewitnesses to report in if they're seeing strange things. And so they put out these, like, keywords that they're interested in, basically, to news agencies and papers around the country. They're like, hey, let the government know if strange flying things are seen, or unexpected animal migrations. And there's like this board in a newsroom that we see with their topics of interest. It's like, yeah, report to the government if...
Right. And I kind of like the way that this plays out. Like, again, this isn't a subtle film. Like, it basically tells you the topics that it's interrogating, and one of which is government conspiracy, sort of, but it's like the idea that the government isn't being forthright with you and isn't necessarily like directly caring for you. And in its big picture stuff, it kind of hides truths, and it won't necessarily treat people well as these processes unfold. So like, one thing is, this guy claims to have seen, I think he directly says, a giant ant. And you're like, oh, okay, well, the government's going to let him off the hook because we know that he's right, but they don't want it to get out. So they say, oh, keep him locked up. This guy's dangerous. We don't want anyone to hear what he has to say. And so kind of like this theme of gaslighting almost. Like the people who say the crazy things, even though they're right, we need to treat them as crazy. There's another one who's like a local drunk who claims to have seen essentially flying saucers. And again, this kind of ties it with the overall Cold War space race fear type stuff. But he says, yeah, I saw flying saucers, and what's more, they were shaped like ants. Now make me a lieutenant in the army. So he's a little bit of like a comic relief. But I enjoyed this kind of angle where they're like simultaneously trying to discover the truth, but also suppress the truth as the government.
Right. One of the witnesses was a pilot, and, you know, you report that you're seeing things in the sky and it runs the risk of endangering your career and losing your credibility. But this guy is Fess Parker, who the next year would be Davy Crockett in Disney. 1955, the coonskin cap, Davy Crockett fad. And then later he was also Daniel Boone on TV. But he's got this, you know, deep Texan accent.
Yeah. And so the idea is, for the two queens that got away, they need to find them. And so one, I guess, got on like an ocean freighter or something like that. And so we see this scene of like these soldiers fighting against the ant. So now it's almost like a war movie for a couple of scenes here. And then the main one, the one of the climax, is they determine that the queen probably inhabited a pipe in Los Angeles, the sewer system in Los Angeles. And the way that they kind of discover this is through, again, these kids. So we kind of have this new series of characters added in the film's final act, which is a mom, and she has these two kids who are trapped in the sewer. So now the FBI and the police are trying to figure out how can they kill the ants, but also keep the kids alive. And I kind of like this as a final act, part of the climax, because so much of what had led up to it was like not being compassionate with the public at all, or like these people who were kind of impacted by it. And now at the end, they kind of have this redemptive touch of humanity. They need to kill the ants, but also rescue these kids.
Right. And they also tell the public what's going on. You know, they have all the news broadcasters, and I don't think it ever shows like the president, but they do use the like national emergency system or whatever, you know, the thing that breaks through on all channels. And they say there's ants under Los Angeles and we're going to go after them. So be ready. martial law.
Yeah, I like this scene. Again, it's played very straight and not silly. But they open it with the federal government, state government, and city government of Los Angeles have agreed that we are instituting martial law. You are not allowed out of your house after 6 p.m. That's how they open the announcement. And then they're like, it's because there are giant ants. And so it's like, I'm just imagining you're a person listening to this who doesn't know anything about it. It's like, boy, that took a turn there. You couldn't guess what the next sentence was going to be out of his mouth. But it does have a little bit of the timbre of like a Fallout shelter type announcement, like duck and cover. It's not exactly that, but it feels a little bit like it's in the spirit of that.
Definitely. I mean, the only thing in my lifetime that I've experienced like that was the announcements of COVID in 2020. Everything locking down.
I also, of course, I always think of 9/11, but that one was weird because I don't know. That was its own thing, that not really related to this at all, but like in terms of public reacting to this horrific thing happening outside and trying to process it and know what to do about it. That's one I'll always think of.
Right. I mean, that was the biggest, probably historic event that I've lived through. But it's not something that they were giving warnings ahead of time.
That's true. COVID really did have a lot like that. Yeah. It's public announcements and be sure to do this thing this way type stuff. Yeah. So then we kind of hit the climax, which is basically just trying to wipe out this queen. And there's an element of suspense that if they don't get this right now, we're like on the teetering point of apocalypse, because these bugs spread exponentially. And so if you don't get the queen before she lays her eggs for her new queens, then it'll just spread beyond your control. So not only do they need to rescue this kid and kill the queen, but they need to do it before the queen has more eggs and they escape, because it'll rapidly become like an uncontrollable situation. And I thought this was a really well staged little bit of action for the finale of this. In general, like the action in this movie is pretty well done, and they do a good job of like keeping it in the shadows. It really feels like you're in the trenches of a war, sort of. I was thinking of the movie Aliens, Brian, the James Cameron one. Have you seen that one?
I haven't seen any of the Alien movies. Actually, I guess I saw Prometheus, but I was thinking it was probably, I mean, that Alien, I know more about the first one than the second one, but from what I've seen, it must have been influenced by this. The way it's got the tunnels and the egg cases and like these black armored creatures.
Definitely. And Aliens, I think Aliens is the one I'm thinking of that I think has the famous scene where she's like tracking it through, I think it's a pipe or something. And it basically ends up coming right towards her and then like kind of falls off the radar for a second. And then there's a jump scare. So yeah, definitely energy of that here. But you get a lot of the flamethrowers at the end, a few tragic deaths, but it's like the soldiers and cops sacrificing themselves to complete the operation or save the kids or something like that. And the way they show the death, it's like the jaw, the mandible, as you call it, the sideways jaw. It's like a pincer, but it's its mouth wraps around someone and like kind of shakes the person up and down. And that person gives an agonizing scream. But one thing they say is like, although the ant ultimately like crushes and mutilates your body, what really kills you is the painful formic acid being injected by these bugs.
Right. So it gets the eyebrow man. It snips him.
Gotcha. So is he that guy who sacrificed himself at the very end? Okay.
Yes. The cop who's kind of been the through line. That's another thing is, if you've ever seen the movie Contagion, this had me thinking of that, because that one tells the story of a pandemic and it like follows many different groups of characters as it progresses. It's like, okay, there's the outbreak, and so there's the initial batch of victims, and then there's people who investigate, and then it goes up the chain of command to the government, and like, how do people respond? And it's all, it's a big story. It happens kind of in stages and progresses over time. And them was like that. And really the only character who's there the whole time is this one cop. And he ends up, walking in different circles.
And it's kind of nice because it, like you said, you use the word through line. It makes you feel the rapid expansion of scope of things when you kind of follow it through a person who you've seen in kind of ordinary circumstances. What it had me thinking of was actually the movie That Thing You Do, because just like in them, you have the cop who's kind of there as things get bigger and bigger and more dangerous very rapidly. In That Thing You Do, you have the drummer, and you have Faye, and you have Jimmy, who are getting sucked into this world bigger and bigger and bigger very rapidly, except in that case, it's like the music industry and the entertainment world rather than giant ants. So in summary, them is That Thing You Do, but about giant ants.
That Thing You Do is also like a vague title. It's like, what is that thing?
Them things they did.
I was also thinking, though, when it comes to animal enemies, humans, I think, undervalue themselves. Animals are not that big a threat. It's like you need to make the ants giant to be a threat. And okay, so sure, an ant hill has like 50,000 ants. But like this little batch of people, like 5 people, they went in and with a bunch of flamethrowers and cleared out an anthill. So think about armies. Like, I think in our day-to-day life, when we're removed from like a world war, like we don't really think about the scale that war happens at. But it's like war is done by thousands of people. It's done on a scale that we don't really act on frequently, but we can. We have the capacity and the strategy and the technology to do so. So I actually think them did a pretty good job of making the animals dangerous. But what I was thinking of is there was a recent Jurassic Park movie that wasn't even the most recent Jurassic Park movie. I think it was number 6 and they just had number 7. But it was called Jurassic Park Dominion or Jurassic World Dominion.
I think that's the 3rd Jurassic World, but not the one that came out this year.
Right. And so the premise, though, was that at the end of 5, I guess, dinosaurs finally got off the island and they're out in the world. And like time has jumped forward a little while, and humans have to coexist with dinosaurs being a thing that's around. And they're like an invasive species, and there's just dinosaurs now. And like they're dangerous, and people are threatened by this mass invasion of dinosaurs. But dinosaurs are animals. They're big animals, but I watched a YouTube essay on this, and think about that the reason that the dinosaurs are dangerous on Jurassic Park is that, a dozen tourists came there and a lawyer. And, you're isolated because you're on an island. You didn't come as a military operation. You didn't come armed. You didn't come with armored vehicles or the defenses that you would need to engage dangerous animals. But that's all that they are, is animals. It's like you would be ready to contend with this if you had guns and bombs and earth-moving equipment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, those are force magnifiers that make humans pretty powerful.
I think you're right. And I think tying it to them, I think it does a good job. So you think of ants and just like the vast quantities of them, and imagining that quantity of the creature depicted here, you can like see how that would be a maybe not existential threat, but a very serious threat, because one of these things, it requires like a small platoon of soldiers because the bullets bounce off their armor. But yeah, I mean, you're right. Like a hive could be destroyed with a single bomb. So like, I don't know, like humans are so good at defeating animals that we need to go out of our way to not hurt the animals, to make sure we don't defeat the animals.
Exactly. It's like a passive thing. We got to be reminded by the Lorax not to do it.
The one thing that's kind of interesting, though, is like in some ways being bigger is a disadvantage. You're a target now. You're easy to find. I don't think this would be true of ants, but like one thing this book, Sapiens, that I read, and I think this is a controversial. I don't think like the takes in that book are like the consensus of all historians. But one of his takes in there is that basically humans, when they essentially discovered boats, when they built their first boats, and they could go down rivers and go to like cross oceans and seas, and they could all of a sudden go to environments that they had not evolved in, and more importantly, the environment hadn't evolved to them being there. And so humans would just go in and they would be like, oh, huge animals that if we have our bow and arrow, we can just mass kill these animals for like infinite meat glitch, Brian. And so that's why like basically what this guy wrote about is on land megafauna went extinct because being big was a disadvantage from an evolution perspective, because humans would seek you out for food. Again, I don't think that would be a problem for them, but compared to like the creatures that we actually would want to eradicate and why we can't eradicate them, it's like mosquitoes. We can't get rid of mosquitoes because they're tiny and spread everywhere. If they were bigger, we could just shoot everyone we saw, but they're so small and there can be so many of them because they're so small.
Right. Yeah, and actually the same thing applies to human bodies. It's like size is an advantage to a point until technology comes into play that just makes you a bigger target. So I love to bring up Dan Carlin's podcast, but he's talked about that for a lot of human history, the strength of an army was determined by the strength of your arm and the length of your arm. So like the army that was physically larger would be the winner because you can swing a sword harder and further. But then there started to be technological advancements that started to negate that until we had guns. And also think about like armies developed armor, right? They wore armor that protected from bows and arrows and swords and clubs and things. And that was great. Really big advancement in military technology. But then you got guns that can go right through armor, and the armies just went to, well, we're just not going to wear armor. We're going to wear cloth caps and things because it's pointless. And I find that really interesting. It's like bigger people are just bigger targets now, and you're getting shoved into the meat grinder. That's how war works now.
So I don't know if I said it, but they do manage to kill the queens. So like all the giant ants have been defeated. And I want to quote the way the movie goes out, because basically one of the soldiers is like, well, if all this happened just from that atomic bomb testing, well, what about all the other testing that we've been doing? What about all the other bombs that we've been dropped in different places since then? And the scientist says, when man entered the atomic age, he opened a door into a new world. What we'll eventually find in that new world, nobody can predict. And everybody looks thoughtfully into the distance at the burning carnage of ant corpses, pondering that, hey, maybe that could be humanity in a couple years. Or maybe, I don't know, that was humanity to itself 10 years ago, less than 10 years ago.
I was also struck both by this film as well as the one that we'll be watching for next week, which I already went ahead and watched. But older films where they put all the credits at the start of the movie, things are happening right up until the final second of the movie. And then they just flash a card that says the end. Now, and I think it must have been influenced by starting to put credits at the end, but it's like there's more of decompression at the end of a movie. You know, there's the climax, and then there's resolution that kind of deals with the picking up of the pieces and the establishment of a new status quo. And like 50s movies just aren't like that. It's the gunfire and the battling and all of it is happening until the last minute, and then maybe somebody makes some kind of bon mot quote, "We don't know what will happen next." Boom, the end.
Yeah, they're right. No denouement, a word we've used in the past on the goods. That is true. I wonder why the storytelling changed. I wonder if it is tied to the shift of the credits to the end of the film. That's interesting. Yeah, I sometimes notice that like in Hitchcock movies. I've been watching a whole lot of Hitchcock movies. And sometimes like the scenario will just end and it'll be like the end and then the stream stops. And it's like, oh, the climax was still going on 45 seconds ago, but I guess we're done now. Yeah.
Not like Return of the King.
No, I didn't have that problem in Return of the King. And that's them, Brian.
That's them. These are they.
Any other them thoughts?
Thinking about those beans. No, I liked it. It was good. Well made and just serious in its craft in a way I didn't expect. You will believe in giant ants.
That's right. I did want to shout out the sound design. I really liked the sort of high-pitched droning sound it uses when ants are nearby.
Yeah, they go like...
Because it's very unsettling and it like puts you on edge, which makes you more prone to being jump scared and startled and freaked out when the ants do appear. It made me think actually of, I don't know if you've seen the 1930, I think it was, All Quiet on the Western Front, which is you know, often considered the first real achievement of sound design in the talkie era. Because you think about like very early sounds, well, the main thing they wanted to do was capture synchronized dialogue with the actors. But of course, you could have other noises in there too. And I think they were aware of that. But All Quiet on the Western Front really explored that idea by putting us in the perspective of putting us in the heads of the soldiers who were bunkered down as like bombs were going off and guns were firing. And there's this great scene where you hear this soldier talking about how he just can't handle the noise. He needs some quiet. He needs some relief from the noise, and how the incessant noise is as debilitating as the actual violence. And I think obviously Them doesn't have it in quite the same way, but it kind of explores that idea a little bit of like the noise freaks you out in conjunction with the actual ants being there. And they talk about the smell of it too and stuff. And I think it does a good job of that. But I think we can go ahead and rate, Brian, if you're ready.
I'm ready.
Them? Her? Is It Good is our signature section where we each give the movie a rating on our 8-point goodness scale, ranging from very not good, which is a 1 out of 8, to our masterpiece rating, a tour to good, an 8 out of 8. Brian, is Them good? It feels like I'm speaking in like a exaggerated Southern accent. Is Them good?
What's them things be? I'm going to give this one a high 6. Very good. I'm going to think about it in the weeks to come. Maybe it deserves a 7. It's done well. They really pull it off. They did the thing. When they're down in the sewers and everything's on fire, I was impressed. It's like, this would have been intense to be around this filmmaking effort. And like, it's got something to say. And especially the first 20 minutes or so where they're creeping around in the desert at night, and there's the sound design, the scary ant sounds, and you don't know really what's going on. You just know something's out there in the night, and they're coming across the carnage, the aftermath. And I was expecting Ed Wood, and that's not what I got. Like, these people knew what they were doing, and they committed to the bit. So maybe it deserves even higher than that. It is the giant ant movie. It's the calling the army to shoot at the big monster. But I really found it valuable. I was in
on Them.
Yes. What do you think?
I'm exactly there with you, Brian. I'm at a high end 6 as well. I think it's a very good movie. And I think the key there is like, it is actually a good movie. Like you said, you think of a 50s genre movie in the sort of sci-fi space, and you expect teenagers from outer space. You expect unintentional comedy to be the charm. But no, this is like genuine thriller craft, horror craft even, I would say. Suspense, good effects, pretty good creature design. I mean, they're just giant ants, but it does a good job with them. And the storytelling, it does slow down a little bit, I think, when you get to the Los Angeles stuff. It's just not quite as immediate, but it really brings you in, and it kind of has like I don't know, something about, it's obviously very different, but then like, for example, United 93, which we talked about 9/11. That's a movie about people responding to 9/11, and you're kind of like just observing the people responding to it. And this isn't the same way, but it does have an element of just, I guess I would say like procedural, of like watching the people do their job to solve this problem and reacting to the things and the new knowledge they have and trying to figure out what to do next. And in a way that's just very satisfying and interesting.
United 93 is a pretty good movie also. I thought so. I didn't know until I saw that movie that it was the FAA director's first day on the job. He walks in the door. Oh, hey, boss. Got some hijackings.
Gotta be the worst possible first day.
It's my first day.
Quack, quack. Yeah.
You couldn't write that.
That would be an interesting one to talk about at some point.
And it takes place pretty much in real time.
Right, yeah. But anyways, I really like them. And I recommend it. I think it exceeded my expectations. And it is, like I said, kind of quintessential of what I think of atomic monster horror movie from the 50s being, and both in its execution, but in the way that it kind of outlines all of its themes very clearly. But not too on the nose that you're like, oh, come on, pump the brakes on it. Like, it just kind of lays it out there, I guess. So I like them. But this is not the last film in which we will be talking about something unusually large or unusually small, because we still have 3 weeks of mini and or maxi month coming up, Brian. So Brian, what will we be talking about next week?
Okay, so we will for sure have small things and big things, because we are going back to the world of special effects master Ray Harryhausen. We're going to talk The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad from 1958, and a couple films that it kind of inspired more or less directly, that both happen to star the same central actor, a guy named Kerwin Matthews. Played Sinbad, and then he followed it up playing Gulliver. So, Gulliver, as we know, ran into small people and big people. I think that's really going to be the crux of the thematic material in 1960's The Three Worlds of Gulliver. And then the last one I want to talk about is a day one pick for me, and we'll go into why in the episode, but one that I've wanted to bring to the podcast for a long time, called Jack the Giant Killer, which was almost like a knockoff Harryhausen. It's like the studio hired the director and the hero and the villain from Seventh Voyage of Sinbad to like recapture the magic. And what a strange strategy, because the magic is in the special effects and they didn't get the special effects guy. But we're going to be talking this kind of Kerwin Matthews mythic monster trilogy with Gavin. Gavin's coming, guys. You know him, you love him. He usually talks religious texts. I think this will be the first time we're doing something other than that. So it'll be untrod ground in some ways, familiar territory in others, and I hope that you'll join us for it.
That's right. Always love to have Gavin. Always love to talk any movie, Brian. We always have a good time here on the Goods, a film podcast. Whether something is extra big or something is extra small, I feel as if our enjoyment grows at a cube square ratio as our weeks. I'm losing control of this synonym here.
You double the length, you octuple the enjoyment.
There we go. Something like that. But I'll see you next week.
Bye, Dan.